Jim is the Dean of Education at Concordia University, Wisconsin, Ann Arbor, and a friend and a longtime conspirator on different Lutheran Ed projects and writing projects. We've done a couple of books together and things like that. So, Jim, I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I'm honored to be here. Thank you. And I just appreciate what you're doing, Bernard, all these podcasts, these different ways of reaching out and sharing what you know. I know how much you love Lutheran schools and all that we try to accomplish in them. So thanks. I'm excited about the conversation too.
Now, to give the listeners a little sense, we're sitting in a hotel room in Fort Wayne, Indiana, at a conference, a Christian education conference for Lutheran schools that are gathered around here. Jim is sitting on a kind of bench, a footstool. I'm sitting on a chair next to the desk, but I'm having to lean far to the left so I can be close enough to the microphone that this will work out all right. So this is
first world problems.
That's right. Very professional thing here, but that's the goal for these. I want them to be like two friends, colleagues, hanging out, having a conversation about ideas that matter in Christian education. And so we were going to talk. I sent Jim this list, and it was a long list. I don't know, 70, 80 items or more.
At least.
Of the different topics that I would like to talk about on this podcast over the upcoming months, years, however long it goes. And I said, Jim, pick out the ones that you would like. So I thought maybe he'd just send me an email and say, well, I like this one. But instead, no, Jim, I think he organized my list for me. He went through the whole thing, and he gave me a list of probably 30 or 40 different topics that he was game for.
You're fun to talk to. So I got a lot to learn too. So yeah, I said, let's pick any of these, but I am excited about our topic here.
Yeah. So the one that we settled on was, and it's a topic I've been writing about and thinking about a lot lately, the last couple of weeks especially, is this idea of lifelong professional development for Christian educators. One of the things, when I became president at Concordia University in Nebraska, one of the things that I was sharing with the community, and I say it's not just about Concordia in Nebraska, it's about every Christian school, university, K-12, anywhere, is none of us are fully prepared for what God has called us to do. And I know it's kind of cliche sometimes when people say that God doesn't call the prepared, he prepares the called and that type of thing. And maybe people have theological issues with some nuance to that. But it's absolutely true that we learn along the way, and that God teaches us new lessons that we learn, and we pick them up on the journey. And those lessons are sometimes just what we need for the next part of the journey. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. And let me echo something you said. Like just that concept of lifelong learning. We all know it's important. Shoot, we all use that term a lot. And probably everybody that's listening into this podcast saying, I'm a lifelong learner. I want to be. But how are we doing that? I mean, is it something we just catch? Do we watch others? Is it just reading constantly? What does that mean? And to me, then, when you take that to a professional organization and ask, how are we committed to lifelong learning, professional learning, getting better at what we're doing? That to me just gets me excited, because, whether you're leading a small team, a large team, an organization, shoot, in your own home, like I'm interested. I would like to know, and you've always been an inspiration to me, Bernard, because you talk about whatever the topic is, but how do we do that? Like, let's put it into motion and action. And that's what I like to talk about.
This is one where I'm sure you've done the strength finders before. And the first time I did strength finders, and I've done these other kinds of inventories. I'm not sure what I think about all of those. That's for another conversation, but I guess they're interesting and entertaining. They are definitely, I give them greater credibility than the horoscope. I mean, yeah. I do think that they can help us reflect on ourselves and what we learn. And I really don't want to diminish. There's a lot of research and thought that goes into building those inventories, and they can have real value. But I remember doing it the first time, and the one that came up for me at the top of the list, you want to guess which one it was?
Maximizer.
Nope. It fits our topic here today. Learner. That's right. So it was learner, and it was like learner by a mile. It was by far my strongest one. And I remember thinking, oh, great. Okay, my strength is to learn. What do you do with that? I mean, where do you go? And then I realized, oh, wait a second. God put me in education. Maybe that's not a bad place to go. And yet, this is incredibly important for anyone in any calling, any profession, the calling of parent, lifelong professional development. And it's one that I've been intrigued by my whole life. I've had this insatiable curiosity, and it's both a virtue and a vice. And I know that about you too. Jem and I both love reading,
Yes.
and we read voraciously. And sometimes we cross paths in the types of books that we're reading. Sometimes we go a little different directions. But that's obviously one. So one part of lifelong learning is just that ongoing habit of reading great literature, reading great books that have great ideas, that can inspire us, that can give us thoughts. What's the role of reading in your journey?
Well, I love that phrase, readers are leaders, or you can invert it, leaders are readers. I was really, many years ago, I was listening to Lou Holtz talk, and at the time he was the coach of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And I'll never forget, the way he put it, he said, hey, you're growing when you interact with other brains. And the only way you do that is meeting and talking to people. Made sense. But then he said, when you're reading a book, you're reading somebody else's thoughts, whether it's a novel, whether it's a nonfiction work, and that really connected to me. And so being an introvert, believe it or not, sometimes I come home on Friday night, I'm gassed. I've been talking to people all week and loving it, but like, I just want a pizza and a puppy at that point, but I still want to learn. And so I'll curl up to a book on a Friday night, and I'm entertained. That's like me being out enjoying a nice dinner with somebody or whatever the case may be. So I do think this reading and reading across disciplines is something that has really been impactful for me. You know, I do read a lot of business books, and I've read a lot of education books, and both of those, I think the world of business can learn a lot from educators, and I think the education field can learn a lot from business, but fiction too. Novels now are considered technology, right? Because they help grow empathy and empathetic capacity. So if our world needs more empathy, read novels, read more. My father used to say, life is about a bunch of biographies intersecting with one another. And I'll never forget how he said that. And so I always feel like if I can learn about someone's story, I can learn more about them and learn more about life. So to me, reading is my fuel. It inspires me. We're people of the word. And so I think that's wired into us. And I know there's some probably listening. I'm not necessarily a reader. In fact, maybe you're listening to this podcast because reading isn't your cup of tea. But I think then, there's so many wonderful technological tools today to use. But again, I think it's listening and learning from others and being intentional and disciplined about it. Plus, for me, it's just pure joy. Again, as you said, I love to learn.
Now, my journey of reading is interesting because I did not read when I was a kid at all. I don't think I read. Well, I did. I had to read some of those age-graded books because I think I was behind as a reader in second grade and they were trying to catch me up. And I don't think I read for pleasure or for enjoyment outside of school. And I think, candidly, to any of those teachers that I had in elementary and high school who are out there still, I don't know if I ever fully read a book from front to back for a book report either, all through high school.
I won't tell either. It's funny you say that though. For me too, my first recollection is really reading is my sophomore year, where my parents got me a subscription to Sports Illustrated. I remember I just read the captions of the pictures, and then weeks would go by and I'd read one article of a team that I liked, and then I was reading little biographies of sports athletes. And then I remember my first book I read was A Season on the Brink on Bobby Knight because I loved college basketball. And then before you know it, I'm reading more historical biographies. So I do think one of the keys to lifelong and professional learning is you got to make it fun. It's got to meet some of your curiosities, and you got to start there. That's how God's wired you. What kind of intrigues you, or what do you want to find out a little bit more about? What are you curious about? And I think we're on to something with that too, because I read 100 books at least a year, and I'm not talking all the little articles and things like that, because I love it. And they are, I would say 20, 25 are historical now, biographies, but the rest are all over the board in other disciplines. that really just stretch me a little bit and make me, answer some curiosity questions that I have. I love that. I love to be surprised. We know that novelty is another condition of lifelong learning. Taking field trips, literal and figurative, are great for your organization, for you individually. And books do that. They take you on journeys.
Yeah, I'm with you. I know that when I was in high school, I didn't read it all. And then I went to college. But growing up, I mean, we both grew up in the era where reading is fundamental. Commercials telling you about books can take you on journeys around the world. We both grew up in that era of those commercials were even put in our schools probably. I remember seeing them on video clips or I guess it was actually the old reel-to-reel films that they would play, and there would be these commercials at the beginning that would promote reading, and Saturday morning cartoons would have these interspersed lessons about reading or promotions of reading Rainbow, right?
Absolutely.
And so I always thought that reading was something noble and cool, but I just didn't do it. Then I'm in college. It's actually, I think it's the semester before college. Maybe it's after my first year. It's somewhere around there. I forget the exact timing, but I had a injury and I had to have a surgery, and I was house sitting. So it must have been right after high school or after my first year of college. One of those two. Sorry, everybody. But I was staying at a teacher's house who's now actually a professor at Concordia, Nebraska. His name's Brent Royick, voracious reader. He was the dean of arts and sciences there for a time. And he was a teacher at Metro East Lutheran High School in Edwardsville, Illinois. And so I'm in his house, and he had hardly any furniture in his house, but I'm staying there for the summer. And he just had books all over the place. And I think I did read, actually, I remember now, it was my senior year. I was going to pick up flowers for my girlfriend at a Hallmark store. And I saw 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and Goleman's Emotional Intelligence. And I bought those 2 books. Those were the first 2 books I ever read front to back.
Excellent.
And then, so that was it. Then I was done with my reading. And then you go fast forward to this summer, and I'm in this house. And I remember I pick up Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. And then I start reading Roger Zalansky, which is classic science fiction, Isaac Asimov science fiction. I'm just reading whatever he liked and whatever he had on his shelf. I read a book a day for almost 2 months.
Wow.
I would start in the morning and I'd read at night, and I was hooked.
Wow.
So now I read at this point I don't think I read 100 books a year anymore, but I did for most of my professional life. Now I think I've had to slow down with some of the other responsibilities and all. So I don't seem to have the concentration to read that much. I still get through 50 plus books a year, but I was always, if I wasn't reading 2 books a week, something was wrong in the past.
But you said something there. It's funny you remember the first 2 books you purchased. I remember the first book I purchased too. It was called The War of Japan. And I remember one of my friends, I was in a dorm at college. He's like, "Why did you bought a book?" He looked at Jeff and said, "I can't, but why would you spend money on that?" I go, "Well, don't you buy books for all your classes?" He's like, "Actually, I've made it my goal." He was a senior. I've never purchased a book, and I never planned to. And I was just, you know what it was, this book though. And then I took notes in it. And I know you've talked a lot about agency, Bernard, and a lot of the things you do. And when I could smell that book, touch that book, write in it, and I invested my own money and time into it, that made it real for me. And I think maybe, taking a zoom out here, we've been talking a lot about reading, and I think lifelong learning and growth as an organization and individual, a lot can come from intentional and unintentional reading. But zooming out, I think it's owning and being intentional about investing in something. Like I knew I was going to be a social studies teacher at that point. So I thought this book is going to be on my shelf forever. The notes are always going to be there. And that ownership and that agency really got me excited to learn more. And I started becoming, they've looked at those studies which comes first? Your passion? Does your passion lead to expertise, or does your expertise trigger and lead to passion? And it's a little bit of both. You have to have a little, but what they found in research is the more of an expert or more insights you gain into something, it generally leads to more and more passion for it, because you become good at it or effective, or you have something to offer. And I think to our topic at hand here, whether it's reading or whatever you're curious about or passionate about, or as you build up some expertise, then you want to learn more. You want to learn the nuances of something. And so I think that ownership and being intentional, I'm intentional about reading 100 books now. I like it too. So it's a chicken and egg thing. But I think that's really, really important.
I agree. For me, there was a moment, though, where reading a book took on a whole new level for professional development. Now, there were two moments I can think of. One, I'm in college, and I'm somewhere around sophomore, junior, something like that. And I remember having this moment where it seemed kind of absurd to me that I was spending all my time going to classes, getting a syllabus from a professor, and then writing papers for that professor. I don't know why, but for me, that seemed kind of odd. And I thought, wait a second, why am I not writing papers for me as well?
Yeah.
I've not given, I'm 20 years old and I have not given myself a single writing assignment.
Yeah.
Not once. And so I decided I'm going to give myself a weekly writing assignment. And I would have to go to the library and I would find a book. Sometimes it would just be a single book review. Sometimes it would be more like a research paper. But I started writing weekly reports. And they'd be 3, 4, 5, 6 pages sometimes. And in fact, and here's my little other confession, by the time I was a senior, I had collected such a large list of papers that when I would go to a class my senior year, and I was a history major, I remember going to one of Dr. Carrio's classes on Latin American history, and I had read a book about the history of Haiti and Papa Doc and that whole thing that had happened, and I'd read and written a couple of papers about it. Now, I had never turned them in. They were only mine, so I don't consider this self-plagiarism. So I took those 2 papers and I rewrote them for the class. And so for the first time, I actually took something out of my own initiative that was out of my own decision, and I turned it in to accomplish something that needed to be done for a class or something. That was a huge linchpin moment for me.
That is great. And I've always admired, I love hearing that story, because I've admired people that journal or write. I've never been a journaler. And I know, but in my adult life, this goal of 100 books, about 10 years ago, I started a digital file. So every book I read, unless it's a novel or for fun, I take notes out of it, and I organize it by word. So it might be from everything from attitude to zeal. If I have a nugget from a book that I think is really interesting, I note that, the source, where I got it from. And again, you said you were rewriting or writing some articles for yourself. I think that's what I wanted to do. Is it helped for me? What's really the crux of it? What really matters? What's critical from this book? And how could this might be actionable. Again, frankly, I'm always flattered when people say, "Hey, Jim, would you come speak to our conference or whatever?" I'm like, "What topic?" And they might say something like lifelong learning. Then I'll look up, what do I have under lifelong learning? What's the research say? Mm-hmm. But for me, my point is the process too of owning that and discern. I know we got ChatGPT and AI and everything right now. For me, I would distill out or pull out the nuggets or the gems that were important to me, just like you were saying these articles were important to you. And I think that's back to agency and really owning your own learning.
Yeah, and what I like about this too is, so we're talking about reading, but it's not just reading. It's trying to extract something from it that matters for us and for our leadership and for our learning. And you do it in note taking. I've done it in the form of, I want to write an essay or a paper on it or a topic, even if it's short. That's why I blogged for so many years, because I would read about something and then I wanted to get my thoughts. Isaac Asimov has this quote. He says, "Writing to me is thinking with my fingers." And whether you're doing it in terms of note taking or something like that, there's research on note taking digitally versus handwritten, and there's research to suggest that the digital note taking sometimes is less efficacious. And one of the reasons that they think that's true is because when you take notes on a device, you sometimes just take notes verbatim. And when you're writing, you can't do that. You can't write fast enough, especially,
Yeah.
especially with a lecture or something like that. But when you're to actually have a creative process is what I guess where I'm getting with this. Well, when you're reading a book, do something with the knowledge. Think about how you can use it, turn it into a model, draw a picture, map it, journal, turn it into an article, but something where you're actually using it, because that's going to be a key if we're using it as a learning tool.
Yeah. And I love that because that's kind of on the outcome end of it. If we're talking about reading here too, I think one of the things that makes for great lifelong learning and professional development in an organization, the research is clear on this, but exploration and being a detective. And so sometimes I'm reading a book in a field that I have no clue about, and I'm going into it as, looking for artifacts or being a detective or just exploring where is this undiscovered country going to lead me? And then when I have that surprise, that shock and awe, that wonder, I know you've written and talked about all of those things. Those are gems for me. Like, wow, I never would have gotten that if I hadn't checked out this book. Frankly, I think I'm probably one of the few Americans left, Bernard, that reads the daily newspaper. And the reason I like
that still exists.
That still exists.
Okay.
And it's costing me $900 a year, by the way, for a subscription and for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. But here's the thing I always tell people, and my wife knows this. I would never read or have up on my algorithms. These stories would never come up if I didn't have that newspaper where I could read page 3 in this story. And it still excites me to read about something I had no clue about. And so I think that's part of where are you in your walk of life? Where are you surprised? Where is there novelty? And for me, a lot of that's in reading, but that's why I say too, going on field trips or exploring something that, I never even had a clue about that. And I fear sometimes we've lost that in the name of being efficient and trying to get things done and executing a strategic plan, or I know what I know and I just need to enhance it and get better. And I want that comes back to, I love reading because it's fun and enjoyable. And I want students or my colleagues to have a learning be a fun process. I worry, frankly, that some of that's getting lost in this whole science of reading debate. That to me, look at how you and I talked about, let's make reading fun again. I mean, like how can we have every person, I know everybody's not going to want to read a magazine on popular mechanics or hunting or sports, whatever it is. But like, I think we forget that, like to be surprised and to go places where we never would have gone before. That's part of the joy of learning.
Now, I know some people are listening to this and they're book people and they're all into our conversation. There are others who are like, okay, move on to another topic. So I'll make a transition point. You've already started to do that. And this was the other. I mentioned before that there were two big kind of moments where reading went on another level. One, when I started writing papers for myself. And here's the other one. I'm just out of college. It's my first role. I'm in Rockford, Illinois, living in a 1-bedroom basement apartment. By the way, quick aside, the little garter snakes would sneak in through the heating vent at night sometime. Yeah, it was wild. One time I was reading the Genesis account, right? The serpent coming.
You got to write about this.
And a snake literally crawled out next to my Bible. And I was sitting, I actually had an air mattress. I didn't have a bed. And this garter snake came out and it was, it was like a biblical moment. I'm reading about the serpent and the serpent literally crawls out. All right. That has nothing to do with my account.
You got a devotion in there somewhere.
That's right. So I'm in this apartment though. I don't have much furniture. I have my air mattress and I had bought my first computer and it had the old modem connection to the internet at the time. I had America Online, dating me a little bit. This is in the 90s. And I'm reading Howard Gardner's Frames of Mind for the first time. It had been out a few years at that point, but most people hadn't really read it. I remember I'd had Mary Hilgendorf in Methods of Teaching Middle School, and she made reference in college to this new theory or scholar, Howard Gardner, but we really didn't do a whole lot with it yet. It was pretty new. So I'm reading it and I am fascinated. And Frames of Mind is a thick book. It's his first publicly accessible book on it. I had actually looked up and found his papers online that preceded the book, and I'd read those too because I kind of geeked out about the topic, this concept of multiple intelligences. So I'm reading it, and I'm jotting down things in the margin, and like I usually do. And I'm sitting there in my basement apartment with my garter snakes, and I'm thinking, man, I would love to talk to Howard Gardner. Wouldn't it be cool if I could just have a conversation with him about this? And I look over at my computer and my modem, and for the first time in my life, I realize it's possible. So I go over to my computer, I search for Harvard's website, where he's cognitive psychology. He may be retired now, I'm not sure, but a professor of a dual appointment to psychology and education, I believe. And I look up, I find his email address. I send an email message with my questions. And within a day or two, I get a response back from his research assistant, from his grad assistant.
Blew you away.
I know, absolutely. So and I get this response, and I'm able to have this exchange. Now, by the way, quick aside, years later, like 4 years ago, when I was running a different podcast, I got to interview Howard Gardner, which was so cool, Joe, because I have read everything. He told me, I remember when I interviewed him, I said, I've read everything that's ever been published by you, I think, and sometimes twice. And he said, well, it's you and my mother, he said. So I was so proud. That's one of my claims to fame. I was just so excited because he played a key role in my early thinking about education. Whether I agree with everything in his theories or not is separate. But in that moment, I realized that every living author of a book is a possible conversation. It's someone that I could reach out to, which actually led to a next part of my commitment, to my approach to professional development. What I've done with that now is, and as a trained ethnographic researcher, I like interviewing. I reach out to people. When I read a book that I like, I almost always send an email to the author. I thank them. I may share a question, something like that. And sometimes, if they're in the area, I'll ask them if they'll go out for coffee, or I'll ask if I can have a phone conversation, or if I could interview them. Or for years, I was a student. I was a perpetual student until my late 30s. So I'd always say, could I interview you for a class? That was my excuse. Then I started podcasts just to have an excuse to talk to interesting people. So that was actually tied to reading for me. Was the idea that an author, because as you mentioned before, a book is something really special because not only is it hearing someone else's thoughts, but it's hearing their best thoughts. It's like if you were going to be preparing the perfect proposal for a spouse. Sorry if my wife ever listens to this. She knows I did not succeed in that. It was a terrible proposal. But she said yes, so I'm grateful. But imagine writing a love letter or something where you're just watching every letter, every word, every sentence is trying to be crafted perfectly. When people write a book, it's that kind of painful labor. So they're trying to get their ideas in the best possible shape to share with others. So when you're reading a book, you're not only hearing their thoughts, but you're hearing their best refined thoughts. That's why I always say as a Christian, in terms of the vocation of learner, the calling of learner, every vocation is the same. It's love your neighbor. It's just you love your neighbor differently depending on your vocation. So in the vocation of learner, the calling of learner, I'm loving the author when I read the book.
Yeah, and boy, that's powerful. And I like that. As you're sharing that too, I keep thinking, and again, whether it's professional growth for you individually or for your organization, when we've even been using reading as sort of the gateway perhaps to some of that, but it's the art of the follow-up and the details and the packaging and the extra thoughts and the letting it curate and having some criticism and opposite thinking and doing a 360 on it so that by the time, by God's grace, you're ready to write the book or make your presentation or give your argument, it's been polished and hardened and maybe gone through a crucible so that it really can be compelling and effective. And I love your story about calling up Howard Gardner and talking to him, because I think that's about professional growth. You have a curiosity. You have a question. You have this cognitive dissonance. You follow up on it. And the more you peel away the onion, or the more you get to the first layer of the woods, the gems and the beauty beyond that, is beyond maybe what you might have anticipated. I need to go further. I need to go deeper. There's left turn, right turn, there's middle lane, and that's exciting. And again, that's where you generate your stewardship comes from, where God's gifted you uniquely. I always ask people, I get asked, I'm always honored to consult with schools and everything. And so I'm asking what they like about school, what should change, what should improve. And one of the things is just, hey, what do you uniquely see from your life experience that you think you could add to improve something? And whether it's writing a book or honing an argument or something that is a real passion for you, I agree with you, Bernard. That's what makes it special. I love listening to people who have gone deep on something. I want you to educate me. And that's why, by the way, aside as an education, if your lecture, I know the lecture gets a bad rap, but if you're mesmerizing for 60 minutes, I always tell people, I love Dances with Wolves, the movie. It was 3 hours and 20 minutes, but I didn't take my eye off the screen because the story was so riveting to me.
Yes.
And if you have gone deep and they're packaging something, whether it's a book, a movie, or a talk, I'll listen to you. I'll be inspired by that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think long form learning is really important. That's why reading a book is valuable for leaders and anyone. You have to stay with it for a long period of time. A long lecture is something similar. You have to follow it for an extended period of time. Sometimes really compelling thoughts take time to build. You have to build some layers to get people to a place where they can really get it and have that aha moment. So they're going to have to go through the drudgery. Even great novels are that way. Yeah. C.S. Lewis, I like a lot of his fiction, but man, the first 100 pages are painful sometimes. And then all of a sudden he's pulled you in. He's just building the layers and then you're finally into it. But I will say, going back to this though, going beyond on books, this idea that an author is someone that I could actually have a real conversation with, I could build a relationship with, I could have as a friend or a colleague. Here's what I've done now for my own professional development. Whenever I'm trying to learn a new topic, I ask this question: who are the 10 people in the world on that topic who are doing the most interesting work? They're the greatest experts. They're the most fascinating people in that area. And I try to find them, and I try to learn as much as I can about them, whether I'm reading their books, their articles, watching their TED Talks or YouTube videos, and I will literally reach out to them, and I'll reach out to all 10 of them. And even if only 3 of them say yes, I'm talking to 3 of the leading experts in the world on this topic. And so it gives me a depth of understanding of a topic. I'm trying to dig really, really deep as quickly as I can when I'm diving into a new topic. And then I just kind of let it percolate, because it's from that I'll be able to see some new possibilities and ideas that I can maybe implement in my school or in my leadership.
Yeah, I like that. Again, I'm thinking follow through and follow up, meeting with people. Let me add this too. You were thinking of the 10 people you'd like to talk to. When I'm searching an issue, what are the different schools of thought on something? Like I'm seeing it this way. Is there another angle or 2 or 3 or 4?
Yes.
That's where, and I love my doctoral training because, lit review and dissertation, you'd always, I'd ask my professor, how long do I stop? I already got 200 sources in my lit review. Once you start getting things that are repeating, then you're done. But if you keep hearing a new idea, and I think that's similar to your top 10 people or they all got something different to add to that. And again, I think that's an attitude, Bernard, that I want to learn something that's nuanced. It isn't quite what I once knew, or I heard it a little different. And I think as long as you keep hearing things and then that are a little different, you can still put a painting or a picture together, but you've done your homework, as they say. That's the exciting part. That's why I'm so disappointed when I hear things like, whether it's politics or others, they won't even consider the other side or viewpoint or talk to another person or 2 or 3 or 10, like you mentioned. That takes the joy out of learning. Things are complex in this world today. There are very few things other than Jesus loves you, this I know, for the Bible tells me. So there are very few things that don't have some nuance in them. And so I want to learn from that and not just have my biases confirmed. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I'm with you. And this journey. I went on a journey. I remember saying a prayer years ago, God, please help me to learn how to love neighbors who are really different from me, while not compromising on my Christian convictions, on that core confession that I have as a Christian and what the scriptures teach. And God provided a number of opportunities for me where I ended up going out east, and I was president of a college that had very, very different beliefs. Most of the individuals did. I read more Black feminist literature in 3 years, and anti-racist literature and everything like that, everything I could get my hands on. It doesn't mean that I agreed with the worldview or the philosophy or other things like that in everything that I read, but I genuinely wanted to understand where people were coming from. And these are real people that I'm loving and called to love, and I care about them, and I care about their thoughts and their ideas and where they got to where they were. Again, I don't have to endorse it. I don't have to agree with it. But I think that's part of professional development too. And certainly books are a great accessible way to do that. But it does require taking the time to actually really listen. And I don't know. You have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, and I think keeping balanced. I've done some research on Lincoln, and if you're reading the wrong stuff, Lincoln got to read some books and authors that took him away from the faith, and luckily he was a faithful Bible reader, brought him back. I would just add this, and I want to give you compliments, Bernard, because you've been an inspiration to me in this. We've talked about reading. We've talked about meeting with people. A third thing for me in my professional walk, and I think it's important individually and as an organization, is to get comfortable experimenting.
Yeah.
And piloting.
Now
and
we're
trying.
This is my passion area.
And you've been an inspiration. But it sounds so quaint and simple, but to actually practice it, to ready, fire, aim sometimes, to just say, to be content with, you know what? And you don't just go into something blindly. Like you plan and prep and do your homework, but like, hey, let's just try this. Let's go all in. But if it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. We'll learn something from it and do it again. Again, that experimentation, that attitude of, by the way, we know we're flawed sinners anyway. We're going to muck it up. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to sin. So why not? I'm not saying get comfortable with sin, but giving it our best shot, knowing that it's probably not going to go according to plan, but it will go according to God's plan. And what will we learn from that? And so you were a great influence. I know there's many books, The Innovator, DNA, and so forth, to experiment small and in a low cost way. But I think that's part of, and I would just say to myself, Jim Pingel, how are you? What are you experimenting with this year? And I'm not talking to my science teachers in the audience here, but like really, what are you trying a little differently than you did last year? It doesn't have to be everything, by the way. Maybe it's 10% of your time or 10% of your tasks. You've been a great inspiration for me. And I have really rested my hat on that. Like I check myself. So part of my goals every year is what 3 things am I experimenting with this year? And it's actually opened the door for me in a lot of ways that I wasn't expecting.
I love that. I remember being a teacher and starting this in my first years of teaching, that I had this experimental mindset. And I remember losing my voice my first year teaching middle school.
Can happen.
Middle school history and theology. I think I lost my voice every year. There was a certain time of the year where your voice would just disappear. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm not really sick, but my voice is gone. So I can't call in sick for the week. I have to get to class, but what do? I can't just talk to them the entire class period. So I turned it into an experiment. And I remember I wrote it out and I gave a piece of paper to all of the students. Now, yeah, I know this is a little bit weird and quirky and all, but that's me. And the paper explained to the students, I will not be speaking any words for the next 5 days. But these are the 5 things that we need to learn together by the end of the week. And I turned it into an experiment. How much can you and I learn together in 1 week without me saying a word?
Yeah.
And that was my experiment.
Well, and you know what? Coaches, athletic coaches, music, they're great about this. You and I have a history with a gentleman by the name of a sainted gentleman, Coach Rasmussen. And, so like here's a drill. All of a sudden you'd say the best scorer on the team, whether it's Roland Sangster's his name or whoever it was, you can't shoot on your team. What are you talking about? He's the best. I know you can't shoot in these next 5 minutes in the scrimmage. I want to see how the rest of the team responds. And then in the very next practice, coach has to say, only Roland can shoot. He's the best scorer on the team. So we're going to work the offense into, like, they tweak and experiment all the time. We're going to play zone. We never learned that zone. We're going to tweak. We're going to run it this game, and look at coaches, how they're constantly adjusting, trying things in real time. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think that's a key part for organizations and individuals. What are you experimenting with and trying out? I mean, by the way, it's a lot of fun. And how many times have we stumbled across things that my gosh, why haven't I been doing that for years? I can't even believe it.
This is good. So experimentation is one. We could talk for hours and hours on this. That is pretty much what I've done my professional life, is just come up with wild experiments. Some of them that I've done, when massive open online courses came out, I started doing experiments. I was really intrigued by academic integrity. I don't know if you remember this. I did this when I was at CUW. So I created a massive open online course that became wildly popular all over the country, called Cheat MOOC. Was the hashtag. and people, I had people sign up. I had at least 100 college students sign up for the MOOC thinking it was going to teach them how to cheat. And then they started dropping out after they realized, oh, wait a second, this is how to mitigate against cheating. Great. And in the MOOC, so the MOOC itself was an experiment. It was a professional development experiment for me to see if I could get thousands of other people together in order to learn about cheating. In the first week, we collected the largest collection of stories of academic integrity and cheating ever. 1 week, we created these experiments where I put different kinds of assignments, and people could earn a digital badge if they got a high score while doing very little work. They had to cheat. And then at the end of the week, the successful cheaters, the ones who got a high score without getting caught, disclosed their cheating strategies to everyone. Because I realized one of the big flaws of academic integrity research is everybody's studying the bad cheaters, the people who get caught. Maybe we should be studying the ones who never get caught. But it was all just a bunch of experiments built into this one class. I was on cloud nine doing that. And then it inspired me. I started doing some others. Jim, I run experiments all the time, and I do it anonymously online, so no one knows that I'm associated with them. So it could be right now that in the digital world, I may have some kind of alias running some kind of experiment.
So you're manipulating us.
I am not manipulating, no. But I do design these games online and other things like that to experiment and to see how things will work. Because how do you do that? We all know, I mean, you and I know that there are only about 10 to 12 really solid, scientifically based features of learning that are universally true. Yeah. And one of them that is universally true, you cannot learn without feedback. Yeah. Right? We know that feedback is necessary, and practice is closely associated with it. Practice with feedback. We call it deliberate practice too. And so that's part of what experimentation is. Experimenting is not to try something and see if it worked or doesn't work. Experimenting is to try something so that you can gain as much feedback and insight as possible.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned something there too, that maybe a fourth category. Feedback is so important to teachers or anybody to learn and grow from, and teaching what you learned is important too. Yeah. And this may sound weird because I know our audience might be primarily educators or mostly educators, but I teach all the time. Yeah, but are you teaching outside of your comfort zone? That's like, are you leading a workshop on professional? What would you say? What are the 10 marks of a true professional, or whatever the case is? When you have to teach something, you really have to know it and do your homework and stretch yourself. And I think that's a sign too of a lifelong learner, because when you teach something a little bit out of your comfort level, and I'm not talking about just a different grade level, you're going to be experimenting a little bit. I mean, you're going to handle something a little differently than you do what's in your normal comfort zone. So I love that. And I know you've been a lifelong experimenter too.
That one fascinates me. And I mentioned before, so practice and experimentation are closely associated, but they're distinct. And I do think that this is another one that a lot of people lose sight of, is lifelong professional development is practice and practicing specific
Yes.
skills. So the example that I give, that's kind of an absurd one. I use this a lot. I think I used it in my first book and all over the places. Imagine someone wants to learn to play piano, and they sit down at the piano and they put some Beethoven piece up and they put the music off, and they go and they touch the keys with their fingers, and it sounds dissonant and terrible. And they stand up and they walk away and they declare, pianos don't work, right? But we actually do that in education all the time. Yeah. You introduce a new approach to teaching and learning, or maybe there's a new way to run a meeting or something like that. You run it one time, you do it 2 times, maybe only 3, 4, 5, 10 times, and then people conclude, oh, I don't like that. That's bad. That doesn't work. What?
Yeah.
Seriously, you're going to play piano 10 times and you can't play Beethoven, so you're concluding that pianos don't work? That's the equivalent in my mind. So I think that a key for professional development is developing a habit of being willing to actually practice, seek feedback on very discrete things, like how to run a meeting well, or how to give feedback to someone when it's difficult, how to coach someone up. And when you're not in a leadership role, how to coach from below. Those are just very specific, discrete skills, and practicing. You got to get your reps in, right? You may have to do it 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 times to really get to a place of mastery.
Well, and experimenting doesn't mean you don't do your preparation.
Right.
You think of it, you use the piano analogy, but how about a science lab where you got to have the test tubes there, you got to have the chemicals, the thing, and you got to know what you're doing and what you're searching for. And now you can experiment and create your hypothesis, whatever. And so your piano, just like the basketball coaching thing too, like you got to know what your goals are here and training your offense, or we're trying to score baskets here, folks, more efficiently. So now let's experiment. And so I agree with you, because experiment isn't just about doing whatever. By the way, same thing for leadership. We get asked, how do I become a better leader? Practice leadership. But I liked it. You said being very intentional with it too, and very focused and specific. And I think that's why that's not reckless or careless risk taking. That's you've done some homework with that. So you are treading maybe forward into a woods that you don't know where the trail leads, but you're at least in the woods that you want to, and you know what state you're in. You know what I mean? Like I think that's all part of the plan. And that, I would just add to, this conversation has been fun for me. I think one of the other things, speaking of experimenting and trying, I think, and I know this is something that's close to your heart too, storytelling or listening to stories or looking for stories is really important to professional organizations, growth, learning. We have the greatest story ever told to share and teach to all nations. And we're people of the book. Jesus saved us. And it's the best Hallmark ending you're ever going to have. And so I think we need to be, if we're about lifelong learning, professional growth, being good stewards of all that God's given us, we have to be story receivers, story surveyors, storytellers. And so I know this is something you're passionate about too. Discerning the story. What's the story here? I've come to this end. I'm stuck in my story here. Where do I go from here? What can I learn from others that have gone before me? Mm-hmm. How can I be inspired by those who had groundbreaking stories and pushed through barriers? Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to inject that in the conversation too, because I know you're passionate about that. Yeah. Telling stories, learning from stories, looking for stories.
Yeah. And it's like sometimes, so if you're going to be a high impact school, the mission and the vision have to be just dripping from everything. And if you're just going around quoting the mission statement over and over again, it's going to get old really quickly. But what you can do is you can tell the stories of the mission in action, and it never gets old.
Don't you think that's why we got 66 books in the Bible?
That's right.
I don't know why got settled on that.
That's right.
But that's got to be one reason.
Right. I would say, though, very specifically, if we're talking about professional growth and development for leaders, learning to be a collector of stories and learning to be a teller of stories.
Absolutely.
And storytelling. I remember, I think, I think I've told you this before. I gave up on New Year's resolutions, and then a number of years ago, over a decade ago, I'd come across this idea of picking 3 words as themes for your year.
I like seeing what your words were.
And I still do that to this day. I still pick words, and storytelling was one of them. And so I spent a whole year just trying to refine my own craft of telling stories. I went to some storytelling festivals. I did some open mic night, kind of like sort of the beatniks, sort of snapping instead of clapping places and all. I read books on storytelling. I'm actually coming back to this. So I'm working on my 3 words for this next year.
Are you going to reveal them here for your?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. But one of them, I'm kind of intrigued. So I'm a Lutheran Christian, and people probably know Grimm's fairy tales.
Mm-hmm.
The original volume was 100 to 200 stories or so that they collected as these researchers. And they were Lutheran, by the way. So I think the Grimm brothers is actually going to be one of my words, one of my phrases for this year.
I can't wait to see what
I'm
that
pretty
rolls
excited.
out from that.
And now this would be the coolest. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it happen, but I'm interested in going to visit the old Latin school, which the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod hosts in Germany, in Wittenberg, Germany. And 4 hours from there is the Grimm Brothers Festival. It's a multi-month festival that's done near their hometown.
You're going to have
in
a good
Germany,
time, aren't you?
So I don't know if I can actually get over there and make it happen or not. But what I'm excited about is it's actually going to be a different way of learning about stories and myths and legends, and learning about how storytelling captures the values and the beliefs and the fears of a people. And that's what we do. And leaders have to learn how to tell stories and how to hear people's stories as well.
And, and playing off that, if we know everybody has a story, what's their preface? What's their prologue? Where are they coming from? What has brought them to this point? I mean, again, getting to know people, there are stories behind them, and professional organizations or schools have stories too. We all hear about the elevator test all the time. If I ask, what's your story personally, as a teacher, as an administrator? You got 20 seconds. What's your story? And now do it with your school. What's your school story? I mean, if I started out, hey, Concordia University, Wisconsin has 5,900 students, about 2,100 are undergrad, and we had 33 majors. We got 6 schools, and ding. I mean, is that the story?
There's a whole origin story to that school.
Exactly, right. But and I know there's more to a story than 20 seconds too. But my point is, I finding out what the story is here is so important, and being a good steward of that. And then, of course, obviously, we're in God's story. It just humbles you, like He gives us. He gives us this great ministry or opportunity in so many vocations. And by the way, we have stories in all our vocations too. The story with your spouse. What's that story?
Yes. Well, for a leader, so this is another one that's become really important to me. And I started the educational design and technology program at CUW, and we were there. I think you would come on at that point, and I had an assignment. I had a course called Critical Issues in Educational Technology, and I required everyone in the class, most of them were working in schools, is they had to write a history of the use of technology in their school. And some people were like, what are you talking about? I'm in this class to learn how to use PowerPoint or, interactive whiteboards or whatever the technology was. And I don't teach any tools in this whole class. I'm like, teach you how to fish. I'm not going to, we're not going to just. So anyway, it was so cool to see people dig in because they learned the stories. And I said, here's why this is important. This is a skill for any leader. Because if you don't know the stories, you don't know the landmines, you don't know what I call the load-bearing walls, what some call load-bearing walls, where, if you're remodeling a house and you knock down one wall, the whole roof might fall on you if it's load-bearing. So you have to know, if you're moving things and you're changing things around, you got to know the story. You got to know the backdrop. And that's actually a form of professional development learning. Because I can have all of the skills, all of the leadership skills, but if I apply them in an organization without knowing key aspects of their story or their history, the whole house could fall on top of me and everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And, moving beyond too with story, or I guess I want to include it. One of the coolest stories we have, and this is our Lutheran system, and I know you so ardently believe in this too, is one of the neat stories we have is going on this journey together and learning together. And I guess one of the things I wanted to, coming full circle with reading, that's why I love book clubs so much.
Yeah,
I
you
love
bet.
reading. I love reading and learning together. And I guess I wanted, as we tell, all of us bring our own stories, because God in his infinite wisdom and mercy made all of us singular and unique. There's only been one of us created in human history, and yet we're the body of Christ. And that's part of the story, or a big part of the story. But what I wanted to say is, if you want to be a professional learning organization, if you want to grow, yes, there is a time. I told you I love reading alone, maybe on a Friday night, or having some solitude in that time. But I also treasure, and the secular data and research would tell you, the power of learning together. And there's nothing, as if you're a leader of any organization or team. I mean, that's why, from ropes courses to going to professional speakers and conferences to, going out and fellowshipping and trying something together as a team, there is power in doing it together. All the slogans are better together, but the research is just like exercise. It's good for you to do it on your own every day. It's off the charts if you exercise with somebody, because of all the extra social and chemicals that are released. And I guess one of the things I wanted to leave too, with being in a professional organization or becoming a lifelong learners, is finding learning partners. I mentioned book clubs, but whatever that is, finding ways to do it together. And we as Lutherans love learning together and love worshiping together and singing together. And I know you feel the same about that. We have a really unique body.
Yeah. I in fact, that's one where I have some room to grow, a lot of room to grow. I think when it comes to the reading, it comes to some of these other things, these are skills that I feel like I've developed at a pretty high level. And I don't think I'm boastful in saying that I've done that. One of the areas that I think is underdeveloped in my own professional leadership is building communities of others to learn together. So I do a lot with the informal relationships, reaching out to the world's leading experts, having conversations with them,
you're
things
pretty
like
good.
that.
You invited me
right?
on this thing.
Right? But the idea of we look at history, and in fact, I'm working on an article that highlights about 10 or 15 different groups throughout history that were formed and what came out of it. Like C.S. Lewis, the Inklings and Tolkien.
Yeah.
They have this group that's gathering together and sharpening one another in their writing and their shared goals. You have Junto, right? You have Ben Franklin's Leather Apron Club, or also known as Junto, which, by the way, near Concordia, Nebraska, there is a winery that's called Junto. And they were so excited when I came in and actually knew the history of the term. I was pretty pumped too. But you have these throughout history where people form these groups where they're sharpening one another around some kind of shared passion, goal, or interest. And that is incredibly powerful. And it's something that I feel is underdeveloped. Like, I've done it with individuals. I have friendships, colleagues like you, where we can geek out and talk about something like this, but something that's regular and persistent, and we really sharpen each other over months and years. I'm kind of craving that, honestly. That's something that that I'd like to add to my professional learning in future years.
But I like your word craving. I crave that too, Bernard. That's why when I read a great book, I want to talk to somebody about it. When I experience something that's really special, I want to when I fail, I want to be around people who love me for who I am, and I can be vulnerable with them. And I also want to encourage other groups to learn and be as excited to learn as I might be. We know that small group that it starts with is in the home too, and maybe that's our school and church community. But I take your challenge to heart too, of how do we inculcate, more of the small pods of learning and learn from them. I think that's something maybe we could get, all of us could think about and experiment with. But I just know the secular research is strong on it too. When you learn together, it's more sticky, more powerful. People look forward to that. So I think, again, if you're an organization committed to professional growth and development, you do need to give some time for individual study and research, because it can become, what do they call it, collaboration instead of collaboration. But you also need to do it together. And I think the great effective communicators and leaders find ways to do that intentionally, but somewhat organically too. And that's a challenge.
Yeah, I kind of envy. So being at Concordia, Nebraska, it's just such an incredible legacy. And these alumni, there are alumni that have graduated and they get together every single year. They've been getting together for 30 years. And they go fishing together, or they do something together, and they sharpen one another. Maybe it's not a real professional development thing, but it's this kind of community. Yeah. And I'm just intrigued by doing that with an intentional kind of learning and sharpening one another over multiple years, and something that I definitely want to work on. Now, I hate to do this. We're going to have to kind of conclude here in the next few minutes because I have dinner that I'm supposed to go to. So I have to find out where it is and where to get to. But maybe just one last thought. I'm curious about your thoughts on this one. Another one that people maybe don't think about as much with professional learning is, and I just wrote an article about this and just released it. So as New Year's resolutions are being considered by people each year, I put something together that's a 12-year challenge. So Kieran Egan from Simon Fraser University created this concept of learning in depth. And kids, when they're like in kindergarten, they get assigned a single word. It could be water, bridge, cat. And their job is to study that word until they graduate from high school for 12 years. They're going to study the science of cats. They're going to study cats in poetry. They're going to study it from every angle, a little bit at a time, week after week, month after month, year after year, so that by the time they are a senior in high school, they will be a leading expert in the world on the topic of cats or bridges or water, whatever it is. And I do think that sometimes we're short-sighted in our professional development. We think in terms of, I'm going to do a course, I'm going to read a book, I'm going to do something. But I think there's something to be said for the long game as well, which is to think about, what do I want to be world-class at 10 years from now? So I created this article. Actually, people can check it out on my Substack, where it's you can sign up if you want to join it. And if it's a 12-year challenge, and I'm going to try to get everyone together in person in 12 years, everyone who does it, and everyone in it, we're going to pick one thing that we want to become world class in between now and 12 years from now. And maybe we'll host quarterly meetings to check in with one another. Who knows? Maybe it'll be 3 of us. Maybe by the end, it'll just be me. And maybe God calls me home before then. Who knows? But I'm really intrigued by it because I just think there's something to be said. And one example, I remember talking to a missionary team that were in communist Vietnam, and they were going to plant a Christian school there. And it took them years and years, I think over a decade, of building relationships and trust and just building authentic relationships and the like. And this woman was talking at a conference, International Christian Education Conference, and she said, I think sometimes we're just too short-sighted. Sometimes we quit too soon, like only after 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
And like, whoa, wait a second. I think about quitting after 5 days or 5 months. And she's thinking about investing in the long game. And I think there's something to be said about that for professional development too.
I love hearing that, because if you talk to any teacher, what do they say? The one-offs, if all you do is have a wonderful day of professional development, but you don't do anything with it, or you don't come back to it, you just had a nice, enjoyable day. Maybe it improved team bonding. Yeah. So I like that. I think people would worry, Bernard, a little bit about that. Like, well, isn't there more to life than cats? And I know you're using that as an example, but I think there's I think that intentionality, delayed gratification for the long term is powerful.
That's right.
And you're learning more than just cats, as like, of course.
Right.
It's just, boy, what would you pick?
But what if you picked storytelling, for example?
Exactly.
What if I want to be the best storyteller I can be? And I'm going to refine it over 12 years.
Absolutely.
Or what if it's about some specific educational approach to education, or a philosophy of education, a certain practice, certain leadership practice, a set of leadership practices, something like that.
You're tapping into that research, and Michael Fullen has written about this. Again, does expertise come and then the passion, or is it vice versa?
Right.
But and wouldn't it be great, Bernard, if we, being a disciple, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And study that for 12 years.
There you go.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim, this is a lot of fun. We're going to have to do this again. So Jim has agreed to be an occasional kind of guest where he'll just come on, and we will
I'd be honored.
Shoot the breeze together and tackle a topic like this. Jim, it's been a lot of fun.
Thanks. You too, Bernard. Take care.